Hapon po sa Gabos. Good afternoon to all attending this lecture. I'll begin by pointing out a very trite point, but it will serve as my point of departure. We are now in bewilderingly troubled times. The global health crisis, which we call the COVID-19 pandemic, is obviously a watershed in our history. Much in the same way as the Great World Wars were, or in our case, the Marcos dictatorship and martial law years, the EDSA revolutions, the 9/11 attacks, the war on terror, and even perhaps the eruption of information and communication technologies. All this changed, and in the case of this pandemic, changing the way how we live. Now, while many of us try to get our bearings in this brave new world, I think we can classify two attitudes or two hopes that prevail. That of waiting for a return to pre-COVID-19 normalcy on the one hand, and the other, that of recognizing the reversibility of the current condition and seeking to establish a new normalcy, a new normal, so to speak. Now, the central point of what I will be discussing this afternoon is how the project for the new normal has unintended consequences that we need to consider and perhaps avoid. Prior to that, however, I will make some remarks on the first attitude or hope, that of the return to where we were before the proverbial shit hit the fan. Now, those of us who have been under some form of lockdown or the other, be it the enhanced community quarantine, the general community quarantine, or even the extremely enhanced community quarantine fortified with ginkgo biloba. All of us have been seduced by the appeal of just waiting it out till the lockdown is lifted. This stance is familiar to all of us. I call it the typhoon bunker model. It is the posture of those waiting for the typhoon to make its way out so that they can clear the rubble, start rebuilding, and go back to how things were. In Bicol, where the average number of typhoons which slam the region is around 8 to 9, the national average is 20. The population here has been accustomed to this cycle of trauma, drama, and alleluia. I suppose this had been the case also when the COVID-19 pandemic inevitably reached our shores. Many have construed the pandemic literally as a storm. Metaphorically, of course, it is, but many have taken for a given period of time, but would also leave us alone finally. And when and if it did that, and how we all hoped it would do that, we would go back, of course, battle scarred, certainly. To dawn on many who cherish such a hope that that's not going to happen. Not only not anytime soon, but never. Not a few thinkers have offered analysis of what we are leaving or ought to leave behind. One of the most remarkable, not because of his insight, but because of the speed with which that insight had been repackaged into a new book, is that of Slavoj Žižek with his hot off the press book, Pandemic COVID-19 Shakes the World. This book came out last March 24, just almost 3 months since China reported the outbreak of the disease to the World Health Organization in December 31, 2019. This book argues for the establishment, really, of a new type of communism after we have rejected our capitalist and neoliberalist ways of thinking and behaving. For him, see the possibilities of this communism when governments suspend the demands of the market economy and state resources to pay private sector wages rationalize services, and direct industrial production. For Zizek, the pandemic served as an opportunity to dismantle the old normalcy of neoliberalist capitalism and establish a global organization that can control and regulate the economy as well as limit the sovereignty of nation states when needed. His call to old norm note this same economy that greatly disadvantaged many at this precise time, and instead alleviate suffering. So this is Zizek. Another analysis we may get comes from the French philosopher Bruno Latour in the journal Le Monde. Latour pitched the idea that the global response against the pandemic is a possible dress rehearsal for how we can respond globally against the distinct threat of climate change. Latour, who is well known for his environmental advocacy, echoes the anthropogenic argument for the causes of the ecological crisis, even as he implies the same for the present health crisis. For Latour and many left-thinking political thinkers, the old normal of our exploitative relationship with the planet has reached its expiration date. It's hastened by the onset of the virus. For him, we must not turn back. For him, we cannot afford to turn back or go back. Now, a specific analysis of what we're going to leave behind with the old normal is offered by Edilberto de Jesus in his take on Philippine education. De Jesus, a professor emeritus at the famed Asian Institute of Management and former Secretary of Education, agrees that, much like everything else, how education is conducted in the country would have to change because of the social and economic implications of the pandemic. He frames his analysis within the context of estimated revenue losses at 55 billion pesos by August and 142 billion pesos by December for the education sector. To recoup these losses, schools would have to return to operations. But given the pandemic, it has to happen in a different mode. The old normal of delivering instruction in face-to-face format is not feasible in a world being normalized by the norm of physical distancing. Accelerated or needs to be accelerated according to the Jesus. Our lecture right now is itself a proof of this. Such a shift entails that learning for class groups would be asynchronous and at the student's pace or convenience. It also, as has been demonstrated by events in the last month, entail a problem of access to online connectivity for both students and instructors. The mode of encounter between the pedagogue and the pupil is that which is being transformed with the shift from the old normal in education. Now, my own view is this. What amounts to learning also needs to be determined as well in this changed context in education. So, in the meantime, it cannot be helped that with the proliferation of numerous analysis of changes taking place, prophecies of the near future abound as well. So you have analysis, and then, of course, there are prophecies. What are these prophecies? Well, we can take the case of writer J. Scott Carpenter, who foretells of the further erosion of democracies as citizens are persuaded to concur with authoritarian and quasi-authoritarian states in the latter's use of means and mechanisms, usually privacy-invading ones, to monitor the population in the name of health security. Carpenter predicts that the US-China divide will deepen and widen, with many nations afflicted by the pandemic turning not to the US but to China for aid and know-how because China's alleged success in dealing with the crisis is greater than that of the US. However, this turn towards China spells disaster for weak democracies as the Chinese Communist Party would not only exact overt quid pro quos in national foreign policies of these countries, but would also peddle authoritarian values and thinking to them. In the case of Jeremy Cliff, who writes for the New Statesman, he portends of socio-economic catastrophe for the global south, where healthcare and basic needs resources are sorely inadequate to the needs of the population. So global south governments, Brazil, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, the increased spending of these governments needed to tide over its hungry and desperate citizens have led to enormous borrowing from global financial institutions such as the IMF. The IMF, in fact, has reported that out of its 189 member countries, 102 had already asked for financial help, which is totally unprecedented. So together with the departure of foreign investments, a plunge in demand for commodity exports, and the drying up of the tourism industry in these countries, sounds familiar also for our case, the outlook is bleaker for the global south. Cliff prophesies that debt defaults, soaring unemployment, mass impoverishment, famines, and future. Now, in all these analysis and prophecies towards a new normal, we can actually see two tendencies. The first tendency in the project towards a new normal is they're seeking a new normal that is covertly a return to the old normal. And two, the project of new normal is truly a complete overhaul of where and what we are right now. With regard to the first, analysis and prophecies that aim to fix the situation so that the economy can get going again are actually veiled attempts to return to the continuance of a neoliberal capitalist world. It's simply a version of the typhoon bunker model I spoke of earlier. And what's the typhoon bunker model again? So you assess the damage while the typhoon is ongoing, fix what's possible for fixing in the meantime, and then when the storm has passed, continue as before, but with some modifications. That's a typhoon bunker model. This is the model many of us are using in confronting this pandemic. When you take a look, for instance, at the present bill pending in Congress on the new normal, that is House Bill 6623, authored by Cayetano himself, Speaker Cayetano, Deputy Speaker Villaferte, and even Presidential son Paulo Duterte and the rest. This House bill typifies this version of the typhoon bunker model. Its declaration of policy is unequivocal about this. It begins by saying the resumption of economic and social activities following the implementation of various mechanisms, instituting public health, safety, and security measures through community quarantines or forms thereof in order to stem the transmission of COVID-19 requires the institution and establishment of standards and protocols that would simultaneously protect the vulnerable from the disease and prevent transmission from asymptomatic or untested carriers of the virus, while ensuring the restoration of livelihood opportunities and sources of income for all, especially the country's poor. What this all say is simply that the new normal being proposed in Congress is simply business as usual, but only insofar as it happens within the context of this pandemic. Now, as regards the second tendency, exhibited by, but not exclusively by Zizek and Latour, the new normal they aspire for is a complete overhaul and overturning of the current system. Precisely, the thinkers have identified this system to be in need not of repair, but of revolution. However, the project for a new normal, regardless of differing tendencies, emerge as a response or reaction to the event of the COVID-19 pandemic. That project for a new normal, much like any other project, has unintended consequences. The use of biopolitical analysis affords us the capability to discern and access some of these consequences. In my view, the practice of political science in the Philippines would be enhanced if standard Marxist analysis is supplemented and even challenged by biopolitical analysis. An event such as the pandemic and the socio-political responses to it cannot be captured adequately by the rubrics of class interest and conflict, as well as materialist ontology and dialectic. Precisely, unintended consequences slip through the Marxist mesh because these are not simply a matter of class interest. Biopolitical analysis was inaugurated by Michel Foucault, who sought to expose how power relations operate, and not who wields power and why. Biopolitical analysis shows how technologies of power that are deployed to manage swaths of population towards specific socio-economic political ends have unintended consequences that are not marked by class interest or ideology. And this is in fact its advantage over Marxist analysis. So what does a new normal look like? Flatten the curve, that is to say, to prevent the further spread of the disease, we have been required to observe physical distancing, to use face masks and personal protective equipment or gear. Quarantines or lockdowns have been enforced, as well as constant self-surveillance and reporting to authorities. The quarantines themselves have been coupled with our accelerated adoption of working online or entering into work from home arrangements, contributing to what the Italian philosopher Luciano Floridi called the migration to the infosphere. These laws, policies, protocols enforce behaviors, cultural values. We now have notions of what constitutes essential work. We now have notions of who are our heroes in contemporary times. The notions of what count as truth. Truth must be scientific, and what counts as false. These are all normalization technologies currently at work. Through them, populations are being normalized, are managed to attain a specific mode of existence in the time of COVID-19. Through these normalization technologies, how human life is to continue, what form that would be in its different facets are being determined. Now, the biopolitical analysis of these normalization technologies reveal that they end the free movement of peoples, but they ensure the continuous flow of goods, capital, and data. As long as people remain embodied, corporeal, the ongoing normalizing technologies restrict and constrict their movement, but not so their data and capital. People are isolated in their homes, but their data and their capital continue to flow. This same restriction leads to a circumscription in which our self-isolation has a further unintended effect of stigmatizing certain people. We saw this with horror and outrage in episodes wherein medical frontliners and even security guards of medical hospitals are shunned or become objects of violence because of the perception that they are carriers of the deadly virus. We see this in the growing hatred of China, which is unfortunately blind to crucial distinctions. The concept of China is a multifaceted one. There's China that refers to the Chinese nation as a whole. There's China that refers to the Chinese people as a race. And there's China, which refers to the Chinese state government run by the Chinese Communist Party. Xenophobia, or a version of it, is an unintended consequence of the project of the new normal. In the new normal, The other is constructed as a disease. And this construction actually serves no class interest. It is only in the infosphere, in the online world, where the risk of contamination and death is absent. This thought, this truth, drives many of us to go to this world, the online world. Hence, more intensely, what happens now is the experience of the social realm will take place in the digital platforms of the social media technologies. And that experience of the social runs the gamut of activities that, in past generations had humanized and enculturated us. These activities pertain to community life, education, religion, the arts, commerce. Let's take one particular case now, that of wearing masks. Mary Inman, a psychology professor from Hope College, Michigan, shared her insight on what happens when we wear masks as part of the new normal. Now, she insists, of course, about the health advantages of the practice. Now, let's make no bones about it. Wearing a mask this time is important. However, Inman spells out for us the practice's impact on social interaction. She says, visual cues afforded by facial expressions are removed when we wear masks, making interpretation of others' behaviors and intentions actually more difficult. These nonverbal cues, signaled by smiles, frowns, smirks, lip movement, cheek twitches, have been crucial since their absence shifts focus now on behavioral outcomes and leaves out its process. What the mask does effectively is not only protect us from the disease, but it adds another layer of distance between people socially. Now, not all these are bad in themselves, by the way. The new normal is not simply ideological warfare between classes, a zero-sum game. But what we need to watch out for are those consequences and effects that, despite the best of intentions, effectively reduce human life to a mere function, feature, or experience. Giraray, maray na hapon na singabalos.
Okay. Thank you po, Sir Eric, for that very deep and insightful lecture. It made us, I guess, to rethink what is happening on the new normal, on the emerging new normal in this present day in our present day social context. So we can entertain questions now. So for our participants in both in Zoom and in Facebook, you may feel free to type your questions and we can ask it to Sir Eric.
Shout out kay Professor Ugarte na nag-attend man kang webinar na to.
I guess we can add uh, Professor Armand to our panel.
Oo nga.
Okay. Wait. Sige. Okay. I guess while some of our participants both in Facebook and Zoom are still thinking of their questions,
Okay.
there's something in my mind that um while you're doing your lecture, sir. So um when when I was doing my grad school, I read Latour, and actually I'm using Latour for my thesis. But so he has this book, reassembling the social, that you know.
Reassembling social.
Yes, sir. So in this new normal, how do we see the participation um of the ordinary, like as a part of let's say in a normalizing, in a new meshwork that we're creating. How do we see like the participation of this um of the ordinary people in crafting this new normal, aside from kasi sir, ang point ko is government will tell you the do's and don'ts, will tell you
Mhm.
these policies, this blah blah blah. So how do we see the participation or how will the ordinary people can contribute in this new normal natin sir?
Okay. That's a really good, interesting question. You mentioned yung kay Latour. No? Let me just remark on that first. Latour at that time was very much involved in what was called an actor network theory.
Yes.
It was a different approach in studying the social, because what he did was he not just looked at individual actors as they effected changes, but he looked at the whole network that's involved in how change happens. And the the actors involved there need not necessarily be human agents. So he speaks of the environment, he speaks of the technologies that are present, so on and so forth. So this kind of analysis is very important when confronted with such a grand event like this pandemic, because we can't just pin down the problem to this virus. As I pointed out earlier, perhaps not so clearly, biopolitical analysis analyzes not so much the pandemic, but the responses of governments and people to the pandemic. Biopolitical technologies, normalizing technologies are the result of course, human agency. But at the same time, for this to take place, there are other factors involved. So that's one. And since I've mentioned other factors, while it is true that governments seem to be taking the charge in crafting the new normal, so-called ordinary people, you and I actually have much to contribute. This particular discussion of ours, precisely, this exchange, is crucial for, number one, understanding what the new normal is all about. Two, with that understanding comes some form of empowerment by which we can use our agency to effect certain changes. Perhaps not drastic ones, but little ones, just enough to make the new normal habitable for us, habitable for ordinary people. Yes. So when you speak, for instance, of the new normal as wearing masks, okay, we as ordinary people can question: must we always wear masks? Is there enough scientific evidence to show that we should wear masks all throughout the day, given this context, so on and so forth? So through this forms of resistance, if I may use the term used by Foucault, biopolitics, we're capable of effecting changes to what can be the new normal. But the main point I wanted to raise really with this lecture is that any project, especially the grand ones, they will always have unintended consequences. And this is what we have to watch out for. So the unintended consequence of isolating ourselves, protecting ourselves from the virus, has resulted to a form of xenophobia, for instance. No one wanted that. No, it was never in the plan. Government was never in the plan of all these people when they came together and decide what needs to be done. But it did happen. So these are the things that really we have to watch out for.
Okay, sir. Um, there's a question thank you, sir, for answering that question. There's a question from Sir Armand Ugarte. To Prof. Eric, who do you think are the losers and winners of this new normal?
Okay. That's well, at this point, at this initial stage of wherein we're trying to effect a new normal, we can speak of winners and losers, those advantaged and those disadvantaged, in terms of capacities, capabilities, access. So in that sense, one of the winners of the new normal would be those in the scientific medical field. All of a sudden, this situation grants them enormous powers to make decisions that will be followed by society. People like our own Secretary Francisco Duque, or in the case of the U.S., the consultant there, Dr. Fauci, whenever they open their mouths and say something, people listen to them. People take them seriously. I recall one interview, for instance, about nurses that they said for the longest time here in the Philippines, they didn't feel appreciated. But with the onset of this virus, all of a sudden they felt that kind of appreciation coming from. So they're winners. Of course, we might say they're still put at risk by this virus. But nonetheless, given the status that has been pushed to them, pushed on them, they're one winners. Who are clearly the losers of this situation, of this new normal. Obviously, those who do not have healthcare. Obviously, those who do not have capital. So, from this initial analysis, from this initial exploration, these people's capacities to make choices for themselves, to run their lives, are undermined by the current response by governments, society to establish a new normal. So that's one. Thank you, Sir Armand, for the question.
Okay. Thank you, sir. There's a question from sa Facebook live po natin. From Partido. I can't read the last name. Anyway, ano ang mas effective na title ng bill for the new normal para ma-assure tayo na hindi tayo babalik sa abnormal na buhay na nagdala sa atin ng pandemic na ito?
Okay. Ganito yun eh. Kung katulad sinabi ko kasi kanina, yung new normal na pinupush sa Kongreso, ang gusto lang nun gawin, yung mga balakid para ipagpatuloy natin yung pagninegosyo, magbalik tayo dun sa dating pamamaraan kung saan bili tayo, benta tayo, the consumerist lifestyle, the consumerist culture. Yun lang naman yung hinahabol ng bill na ito. Bumalik tayo sa ganong klaseng kalagayan. Ngayon, kung gusto natin palitan yung pangalan ng bill, dapat siguro palitan rin natin yung nilalaman nung bill na yun. Kaya lang kasi ang gusto ng bill na yun, back to normal lang naman. Back to normal, hindi na siyempre kaya yung pre-COVID times. Kundi back to normal, maski may COVID. Yan yung laman ng new normal. Sila Latour, saka sila Chichek, kaya ko sila nagamit, kasi yung proyekto nila, total overhaul. Kita nilang bulok yung sistema, kaya kailangan natin palitan. So, kung sa kotse, hindi natin kailangan palit ng makina, palit ng gulong. Kailangan palitan yung buong kotse. Kasi talagang sira na siya. Kung ipagpatuloy natin yan, mas lalo lang tayo malulugmok sa problema. So, yun lang sabi ko.
Okay, sir. Thank you po. There are three questions. Yung saro po sa Q&A section, I'll ask the question of Mark Rivera. Thank you, Sir Federico. The lecture was indeed insightful. So the question, certainly, there would be changes in the public sphere. But would this global crisis change the normalcy of the private sphere? And also, how would it change the private sphere actually?
That's really a good question. It would seem at first na protected yung private sphere, that it's only within the realm of the social public where these changes are taking place. But that's not quite true. No? Even our conceptions of who we are, how we relate, whom to fall in love with, whom to relate with, they're affected by the establishment of the new normal. Like I said earlier, yung migration to the infosphere, the hastened, accelerated migration of humanity to the infosphere because of COVID-19 allows for certain types of relationships to prosper, to flourish, but at the same time cuts, undermines others. So, for instance, you cannot have a relationship online with someone who does not have access to the internet or doesn't have a mobile phone. So, kung pag-uusapan natin yung issue yun, alam na natin sino agad yung talunan doon, di ba? Wala kang cellphone, wala kang ka-chat, wala kang ka-text. So, yeah, this kind of circumstances, of course, have an impact in our own personal lives. Okay. My own mother, who's a senior citizen, has been taken to social media the last few months, and I I jokingly worry about her, and I tell her, don't post so much. Don't post so much stuff on the internet, on Facebook. But on the one hand, I understand that all of a sudden, given this technology, she has a way to reaching out to cousins of hers whom she had not seen for a long, long time. She's able to reach out to family members. She's able to reach out to fellow people whose interests she shares, dogs, plants. So with the use of these technologies, it has, in a way, also enriched her life. She's, if I may say so, happier than when she had no form of contact like this one. So in the introduction of new normalizing technologies, it's not just the public self that gets affected, but the private self as well. And actually, personally, that's what I'm interested in. What sort of self gets constructed because of all this normalizing technologies that we, see, that are proliferating right now, that are being pushed, deployed right now. So I hope I've given some form of intelligent answer to that question.
Okay. There's another question from Tina Salomon. Any insights on how the new normal will affect existing inequalities based on class, ethnicities, gender, and what are its implications to social movements who need to adapt to changes brought about by the pandemic while still dealing with historical injustices? Would their agenda still remain relevant?
Hanggang ano oras tayo? That's a really fantastic question. It's let me just take siguro one aspect na, but really, really good question. It's actually a good paper, no? A good paper actually, pwede siyang gawin. Let's take the case of gender. No? How does the new normal wearing of masks, xenophobia, physical distancing, shift to online digital platforms. So how do all of this have an effect on, say, gender relations? I don't have actual data right now about the gender disparity when it comes to healthcare. I don't have actual data right now when it comes to how many of our medical frontliners are female, how many of them are male. But I have some familiarity as to how the virus is supposedly more attracted to male patients or to male members of the population. So, given this, I'd say the responses of the new normal do not yet consider gender differences. Kumbaga, hindi pa nakikita nito mga nilalagay natin mga mekanismo na kailangan din natin tignan baka ang epekto nitong mga mekanismo, the effects of these mechanisms on people with different genders would be different. So just to be honest, I haven't gone yet to looking at those details yet. That's, like I said, it's a fantastic question. I'll look into it. I'll work on that. So thank you, really good question.
I think, sir, there's a follow-up from our Facebook Live. Yung sa tanong po kanina regarding po sa effective title on the new normal bill. Ano daw, kaya nga, ano po bill ang dapat ipalit para title pa lang alam na new normal ito?
Alam na. Okay. Yeah. You know how Congress works. It's, lawmakers, congressmen, of course, file bills that serve certain interests. It would be good that the bills being filed there serve the interests of their constituents and not their own or their group or their political affiliation. But let's give these people the benefit of the doubt. Let's give people these people the benefit of the doubt. When they launch this new bill, they realize really that the old way of doing things pre-pandemic is not feasible anymore. So they haven't gone that step. They haven't gone further to ask, inquire, check, or even challenge the current neoliberal capitalist system that has a hand in how this virus had erupted into our lives. They've not gone there. Hindi nila tinignan yon, hindi nila inusisa yun. Nandun pa lang sila sa pag-uusisa kung paano tayo magpapatuloy na iwanan natin yung dati nating buhay. So, if the question is what sort of bill, what sort of title, and what sort of bill do we need? It's going to be, it's hard to say, given that if the goal is really to overhaul the whole structure, then we might say such a change will not take place in the halls of Congress. The halls of Congress, much like any government institution, is built for stability. It's built to keep the status quo. So with that in mind, and I don't think what you seem to be suggesting will be possible sa halls of Congress. So yeah, that's just me. No, that's just my take there.
Okay, sir. My another question. Another colleague of yours joined our conversation Professor Loquias has a question.
Oh,
so
shout
thanks,
out
Doc
to
Eric. The sphere of the sphere of personal relationships, especially the family, might be forming or influencing the new normal. How do you see it? That's the question from Professor Loquias.
The sphere of personal relationships, especially the family, might be forming or influencing the new. How do you see it? Okay. Sige. It's interesting that for many of us in the Philippines, when we speak of households, homes, we can think of actual homes, families. But for many migrant peoples all throughout the world, the notion of home, of a household, is totally foreign. So when we push for the new normal that would include having a family, we immediately discriminate a huge number of people who by their very existence have no access to the luxury of having a household of a family. This is not to say that what you're saying, Vic, is incorrect. It's actually right. No, the notion of having a family is actually influential in the construction of what is seen to be the new normal. When government says, okay, lockdown tayo, we have enhanced community quarantine, we have general community quarantine. The idea is these people stay at their homes, and in those homes, they are with their families. And hence, the problem is to ensure that they have food, that they have their basic necessities. But many other peoples do not have that luxury. They don't have homes to go to. They don't have families. So, ang sasabi ko lang, kung ang normal dapat may family, kailangan rin natin intindihin, maraming tao ang walang pamilya. Kaya lang, kasi sa Pilipinas, sanay na sanay tayo na may family-oriented kasi tayo. We take that for granted. So, if we're looking at a global new normal, we also have to be careful in pushing for this, because we might be pushing for this, but at the same time pushing people out, because they do not have this luxury that we are now enjoying. So that's all, Vic. No, I hope I've given something satisfactory for you to chew on.
Okay. Are there any questions or insights from our panelists and attendees, both in Zoom and Facebook? Okay. Okay. Oops. My pahabol, sir.
Okay.
Let me read po sa chat. Medyo mahaba. From Tina Solomon again. Just my 2 cents. I think this is an insight. Okay. Just my 2 cents worth. There is a rise in gender-based and intimate violence due to cabin fever conditions in the household, and reporting is close to nil. In terms of division of labor, health and household management is almost always relegated as feminine labor. This while male labor, say, being the breadwinner is challenge and may lead men to have a sense of loss of manhood. Shaking these power relations are enabling conditions for conflict to escalate within households.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. I listened and I read your remark. That's also true. What I have to say, however, is something like this. With the great diaspora that happened during the 80s, 90s, in which Filipino workforce went outside of the country, many of these were women. Earlier 70s, 60s, mga lalaki. But because the demand for labor targeted female labor, many women became breadwinners, which left men staying at home become housebands or part-time housebands. Okay. So there's a role reversal there. Women now had greater power or greater decision-making power when it comes to spending of income, because they were the ones earning it. But you're correct here. When the pandemic hit the world and there were job losses, many of our OFWs went back. So that decision-making power was put in jeopardy. Many women were not anymore earning, and so they were stuck at home, and they experienced a powerlessness again of not being able to contribute to family income, some of them. So I would agree with you that it does shake up gender relations, but right now I'm inadequately equipped to provide a really intelligent answer to how it shakes up those gender relations. But the ones you shared, I agree with them. In fact, I say closer study of this phenomenon is actually needed. This one facet. So thank you, Tim. Thank you.
Okay. Pwede pa sir kahit one more question?
Sure.
Okay. There's another question from Miss Jovi Cadores sa Facebook po.
Oh, si Jovi.
Yes. Hi Sir Eric, as someone working in an e-learning system provider, we struggle with this new normal. My question is about shock doctrine. How can we make sure that billionaires won't exploit this moment of education crisis?
Oh, your question, Jovi, is how do we ensure that billionaires do not exploit? Sa totoo lang, we can't. We have to appeal to their good nature, not to exploit people. But, if there's one thing that this pandemic has also shown, and, CISEC has alluded to this, and actually many left thinkers. That's why they're saying this is the opportunity right now to change things. Is the great outpouring of solidarity. We can be cynical and say, okay, big business is doing this because they want to ensure the continuance of their operations. They want to build, a good image. That may be true, however. But all across the globe, altruistic actions have been celebrated. Actions of giving, being in solidarity, providing help, providing aid, have just happened. So there might be something there that's really very, very positive on the one hand. Like I said earlier, this is a watershed moment. And many of us have realized that and are thinking, ito na yung pagkakataon natin na para mabago na natin itong sistema. Sana wag na natin balikan yung bulok na iniiwanan natin, yung bulok na sistema kung saan ito nga, maraming mahihirapan, lalong napahirapan ito. I think may ganun talagang sentimiento sa marami. So, sa tingin ko hindi lang yan sa atin, sa low class, middle class, maski mismo yung mga sabihin natin, financially elite members ng ating lipunan, nakikita nila yan. And so, there's a general outpouring of generosity for others. Now, when it comes to that particular field, e-learning, it's hard to say how to appeal to the good nature of the billionaires and the multimillionaires. But if they see that, the e-learning process, the e-learning mechanisms are actually improving lives and at the same time contributing to their bottom line, then I think when we do reach that balance na nakakatulong pero kumikita sila, baka hindi nila expect. Baka. But, hindi ko masasabi kasi hindi ako ganun hindi ako mayaman. But I think that's the trick there, to reach that balance. Profitability on the one hand, sadly profitability, and at the same time service. So, thanks Juby sa pag-balance pag-attend.
I guess sir, last question ulit. last.
Sure.
From sa Facebook tinanong from Edward Sheener. The new normal brought by this pandemic saw the return to the closure and strict control of borders, reinforcing exclusion and inclusion. Just curious how this even shaped both the global and the national.
Yeah. Reinforcing exclusion and just curious how this even shaped both the global and the national. Okay. As you well know, the desire to flatten the curve immediately brought to mind the notion that we have to separate the sick from the normal, the sick from the well, those who are not sick. And so this simply multiplied itself, and augmented itself, not just within a certain community, but all throughout the country, the regions. So what the pandemic brought about was fear of the disease, fear of getting the disease. But the new normal that served as a response to that threat, to that perception of the threat coming from the disease, had the unintended consequence of xenophobia. So, does the disease itself bring about xenophobia? Hindi. No. It is the response to the disease that we governments made that has led to this unintended consequence. So, closing of certain borders. No. But even as we, even as many countries close their borders, many communities close their borders, um, it's it's a painful realization for many of these people, many of these leaders who close their borders, that hindi natin pwedeng gawin yan. No? Kailangan natin buksan ito kasi kailangan natin sila. No? Kailangan nila tayo, kailangan natin sila. Germany, for instance, I read earlier, has opened a green corridor so that around 80,000 Bulgarian workers can come in so that they can work in Germany. Of course, the rates, yung bayad sa kanila, napakababa. Pero binuksan ng Germany yung border nila para dito kasi kailangan rin nila. At kailangan rin ng mga Bulgarians ng trabaho. So, ganun. The same happened also to Austria. No? So, yun lang, Shiner, ang masasabi ko. The fear of the disease led to responses that eventually brought about a xenophobia. So that's it.
Okay, I guess that's it. Maraming salamat po, Sir Eric, and also to our panelists and attendees, both in Zoom and Facebook, for your time and for sharing your insights this afternoon. So this is a very wonderful conversation. So sana nag-enjoy kayo, may natutunan to aid us on this crafting new normal in our present day societies. So on behalf of the organizing committee, mabalos pong maray, Sir Eric, for this very wonderful lecture, for sharing your time and expertise this afternoon. Maraming salamat po. Tomorrow, not tomorrow. On Friday, we are going to we're going to talk about video game archaeology with Kale Ichivari from University of Washington on Friday. So please follow the museum page for more updates on our ongoing series. So if some of you are interested to also share your thoughts with us, you can email me or you can message us on Facebook of the Society Sarab, so that we can schedule conversations or talks for the following weeks. So, mapalas po again, Sir Eric. Salamat po. Cheers.
Thank you rin to you, PSU, and for those people who took part in this webinar lecture, this mga nagtanong. Thank you very much. God bless. God bless.
Thank you, sir.